Today I am speaking to one of the most well-known voices in Melbourne. He is influential in raising money for various charities through his radio show, most notably the Good Friday Appeal, and he makes the public aware of the most important topics of the day. I speak of Neil Mitchell. How you going, Neil?
Well, thank you for talking to me.
Where did you grow up?
I spent the first years of my life at Rosebud. My father was a school teacher, so we moved around a bit. I spent about the first 4 years at Rosebud, then we moved to East Oakley, then Glen Huntly, and Caulfield area.
And did you change schools often as a result?
No, I changed schools. I spent most of my primary schooling at East Oakley State, briefly at Glen Huntly State, but very briefly, and then Caulfield High School. So no, I was lucky. I really didn't change around much. My brother did a lot and he hated it.
Was it hard to sustain friendships because of the moving?
No, not really, but it was more hard to sustain friendships because my father was a teacher at the school and the other kids didn't think much of that.
Were you a good student in terms of your marks?
I did very well in the last few years at school, which was really trickery because I don't think I was very bright or anything. I just learned how to pass exams. In those days they had a first and second class honours system, and I got second class honours in every subject, and I was about in the top 6 in the school. But that got me a job, but it didn't teach me anything. I just knew how to pass exams, conned my way through.
So did you study a lot? Were you a hard studier?
No, I studied probably for the last 3 months, and I reckon I was bummed around the rest of the year and had fun.
That's the way to do it.
Well, I don't recommend it to my kids, I assure you.
Your first job was as a newspaper delivery boy. How old were you when you got this job?
Well, actually, my first job was probably selling the papers on a street corner, and I would have been about 11 or 12. Very young, but in those days you could do it. I used to sell the Herald on street corners. Then I progressed to delivering them about 13, riding a bike around the Elwood area it was, and then I started doing an early morning delivery in the Glen Huntly area where we lived, which was sort of getting up at 4:30, which I hated then and I still hate. And then I progressed to being a chemist delivery boy, which was that was the top class job there, because you worked sort of 3 o'clock in the afternoon or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and you didn't have to carry dirty newspapers.
Did you have any other jobs as a child?
I sold sewing machines for a while. Well, when I say that, I worked at Myer in Chadstone in the sewing machine department. I never actually sold one. In a year I didn't sell one. So they transferred me to the electrical department, which was a bit easier, and I sold a few things there. I used to work there Saturday mornings and Christmas holidays, but I finished school just as I hit my 17th birthday, year 12, and I started at the age in January of the next year, so I was really very young. I didn't have time. I was sort of straight into full-time work.
When you started delivering newspapers, did you have an interest in the news?
Yeah, to an extent I did. I had an interest in the drama and the excitement around it. I used to love being there when the papers arrived and the smell of the papers. When I went on to be an editor, I loved the smell of the papers. I liked the drama and the excitement rather than the events, and then I gradually developed. But I decided very early I wanted to be a journalist, so I developed that interest in news.
Did you study at university after you finished school?
Part-time. I started at the age, which was ridiculous in retrospect, at age sort of 17 and 1 month, and I went to university part-time, Melbourne University, for several years, where I was very undistinguished. But I didn't finish the degree. My boss at the time said, you've got to decide whether you want to be a journalist or a student. And they used to run the rosters so that my lectures fell on the days off. So I'd work weekends and a 5-day week, and then I might have Tuesday and Thursday off to go to lectures. And it got a bit wearing because you never got any time off. But I winked it and said, no, I won't finish the degree. I'll go back to it some other time. And I haven't had time.
So were you studying journalism?
Yes, let's see. There was a journalist course, but it was sort of part of an arts degree. I'm not sure. I'm not sure in the end where it took me. But I did several journalistic subjects and several art subjects, like politics, and I had a subject called rhetoric and law affecting journalism and general journalism and economics and things like that. I don't know why I was doing economics, kind of thing, but however I was.
Did you enjoy uni?
No, not really, because I think one of the attractions of university is the whole culture of being part of this environment, and I just dropped in and out of it. I mean, sometimes I'd go straight from a job as a journalist up to a tutor or a lecture, and then straight away go back to the office to write it. I couldn't be absorbed in the culture apart from those times when I had the day off to go. And then I was more absorbed in the pub culture than I was in doing any work.
What was your first media job?
The Age, a cadet reporter on The Age, 1969 it was. Just doing general bits and pieces, what we used to call the chores, which are shipping movements, weather, tides, 2 or 3 paragraphs on things that had happened. Just bits and pieces. I don't know if they do that anymore.
What was your first radio job?
I was editor of the Herald. I left The Age after 16, 17 years, went to the Herald as editor, the now defunct Melbourne Herald. And Darren Hinch used to do the morning program, and as editor of the Herald, he invited me to come on at 10 to 12 every day and tell him what was in the paper, and I did that. Then, when Rupert Murdoch bought the Herald, I decided it was a good time for me to leave before he sacked me. So I left, and then Darren was going on holidays, and he said, come and fill in while I'm away for 2 weeks. So I went and did that, and they then offered me a weekend breakfast, and I freelanced for a year to work for Time magazine, bits and pieces. Weekend breakfast, Saturday and Sunday breakfast, and then I was offered the drive program. Did that for 2 years and moved into mornings. I moved into mornings in 1990.
So you said you started filling in for Darren Hinch in about 1987. Did you know anything about Darren at that stage?
Oh yeah, I'd had many lunches with him. I knew him quite well.
And did he give you any advice that you still use today?
His only advice was, it was an interesting thing and he's right. When writing a script, writing an editorial, he said he would often, and I still write a lot of editorials, I do a lot off the top as well, but he would write in an error, for example, not deliberately, you might be writing along and he'd say, and of course Julia Gillard's been Prime Minister for 4 years, oh no, it's only actually 3. And he would actually write that in sort of a stream of consciousness thing as he went, and then he would read it because it seemed more natural rather than going through and correcting all those little things. And that was a good piece of advice because it's very difficult when you first start on radio delivering editorials to sound natural.
Being the presenter of the 8:30 till midday slot on 3AW, could you talk us through a regular day in your shoes? For example, what time you get to work, when you leave, and the preparation for the next day?
Sure. Well, I get up about 4. I'm in the office by 5 or soon after. I pretty much come to work immediately. Go through the newspapers, have a look at some of the online papers, have a conference with my staff at 6:30 when we set the agenda for the day and what we want to do. About 7 o'clock I start writing editorials and constructing interviews. We'll have some set up from the previous day, but most aren't. Doing a bit of research and reading and trying to get my head around what I want to do and what I want to say. 7:45, I do a daily cross with the Sunrise program. It's national, but they're based in Sydney. We've got a little studio set up here with a remote camera. I just go and sit there and do that. 8 o'clock, I'll come out and listen to AM and the other news bulletins, check the other news bulletins, fiddle with what I've got, know where we're going, and that's a variable feast. I mean, you might set out looking for 4 people and get none of them, or you might get 6. 8:30 on air, Bedlam till midday. Usually the Bedlam continues to about 12:30 when we get off air. I'll try and have something to eat then. We'll have a conference to set up the next day. Bits and pieces, meetings, commitments. There's usually a couple of meetings, luncheon meetings. I have a week when people just come in. The years of the boozy lunch are gone. People come in and we'll have a sandwich and a chat. That's a couple of times a week. I'm usually try to be away by 3:30 or 4. It's not unusual to be here 12 hours without a break and no meal. Then I'll go home and have a bit of a rest, a bit of exercise, watch the TV news, talk to Justin, my producer, chase a few things, get an idea of what's happening in the world. And I try to be asleep by 9 o'clock, which is very boring, but it's the only way I get any reasonable sleep. And then I'm up at 4 o'clock and into the emails again.
Is it hard having so much go through your head all at once?
It is. It's a bit intense, but I've always worked that way. It can be tiring, but I find I try to turn off from about mid-afternoon Friday until mid-afternoon Sunday when I start working again. And this year I'm determined to try and take a regular break, and really work flat out for 3 months and then take 2 weeks or a week.
And you said that in the morning you go through and try and construct interviews and stuff. How much of your regular show is pre-recorded? Is any of it pre-recorded?
Very, very little. I don't like pre-recording. We'll only do it if there's no option. For example, yesterday I had to pre-record an interview with a guy in London because of the time difference. That'll happen. Sometimes a politician, senior politician, might say, look, I'd love to talk to you, but I can't do it. I'm in cabinet then. I'll pre-record them. And I always do that as live and don't edit it. But when I say construct an interview, I mean I want to think with an interview, where do I want to go? Where do I start to bring the audience in and get it interesting? And where do I want to finish to leave a bit of a sting in the tail? That's how I go about constructing an interview.
And that obviously works for you?
Sometimes it's a disaster. It's the nature of live radio.
What is the process of choosing topics to talk about for the morning? How do you distinguish between topics that you think will be good and topics that you think will just be flat?
Well, generally it's something, the basic rules have got to be interesting. They've got to have a level of importance to them. We've got to have a mix to the program, so not everything is heavy and important. There's a bit of fun as well, and we try to structure a program that goes sort of heavy and aggressive and then light and fun and achieves things, helps people. News has to be interesting and relevant and has to touch people. We usually, with our major interviews, look at things that people can react to, comment on. There's no point in an esoteric discussion about some sort of economic issue if people don't understand it, but there is a point to a discussion about why food prices are so high, which is making the point. So usually our interviews, we're aiming to get audience reaction to it, or audience involvement, something that touches them. If the board isn't full of calls, I'm nervous.
You are known as the man who sets Melbourne's news agenda. What does this title mean to you? It said that on the 3AW website yesterday. I saw that.
I wouldn't believe that necessarily. On a good day we do, and that's important to me because I'm a journalist. Other radio people around the country tend to be less journalists than I pride myself on being a journalist, and if I've had a good day and I've broken news today, for example, which I imagine will be on the television stations tonight, I feel some satisfaction in bringing to public notice things that otherwise wouldn't be in public notice.
As the news agenda decider, do you feel you are biased towards certain types of stories and subconsciously ignore other stories, or biased towards one side of a story?
I don't think I'm biased towards one side of a story, although I have opinions and express them, but they're opinions based on an analysis rather than a prejudice, I would hope. I would hope the audience couldn't pick whether I was a Labor or Liberal voter, although the program is generally right of centre. I think it comes back to that point about being interesting. I think you really need to remember your role, and your role is to be relevant and interesting. That's the key to it.
I've read that you have worked for magazines, newspapers, and you've worked on radio and TV.
Yep.
Do each of these areas present a different challenge, or are there common grounds between them?
They do present quite a different challenge. I think the common ground is that underlying thing of being relevant and interesting, not taking yourself too seriously. But in the end, you have got to relate to your audience and hold your audience. There's no good being pompous and self-righteous. You've got to, if you're on television, you've got to pick things that are relevant to your audience and explain them in a very simple way, being television. Radio, you need to relate to the audience. Newspapers, you need to design a page properly and involve your audience by bringing them in to read the page. A lot of people don't understand in newspapers, they'll write some 2,000 word piece which is just damn dull, and it could be important and it should be interesting, but they sort of are expecting the reader to read it through an obligation. I don't believe in that. I think you've got to encourage a reader through in the same way you've got to encourage any audience. So you've got to get their attention and bring them along with you, rather than just say, oh, you should read this because it's important.
And you've been head of sport, I think the Herald Sun or The Age, and you've been an editor, you've been in many different magazines. Do you prefer a certain position?
No, look,
is it in a newspaper, or do you prefer radio or television?
No,
live?
I was Chief of Staff News Editor and Sports Editor of The Age. I was Deputy Editor and Editor of The Herald, and I worked for Time Magazine as an editor, contributing editor, but I was a writing editor. and the radio job, I run my own show, and pretty much in television the same. I think my personality is suited to being in control. Some would say I'm a control freak, but I want to be making the decisions and taking responsibility for the decisions. Now, you do that at all levels of journalism, but when you're editor, that's the ultimate decision-making responsibility, and that's what I like. I like looking at a TV program or a newspaper or a radio program and saying, well, okay, I take responsibility for that. And I'm very hard on myself. I'll look at the errors and say, it's my fault. I buggered that up, or I got that right. That's what I like doing. I like having the control and the authority.
And then taking the consequences.
Of course, yeah, that's part of it. And that's not because of I want glory for it. I feel embarrassed by criticism. It's because I want the satisfaction of knowing it's done as I wanted it done. And if it doesn't work, if my ratings go down, it's my fault. If they're strong, it's in my doing, at least to some extent.
If they do go down, what area of the show do you address first? How do you change your show to try and get the ratings back up?
Well, you don't do it immediately because things can fluctuate, and you get a sense if you're missing somewhere. Where I've had problems in the past and I've thrown things up in the air and started all over again, I've looked at my own performance as a starting point and what we're doing and how we're doing it, and then I've looked at perhaps some of the people we're putting on air. I've looked at our opposition, and you can, as you know, in radio you can get quarter-hour breakdowns of where your audience is going and when, and I'll address it that way, very analytically. But in the end, it's a gut thing, radio. If you knew how to program a radio station perfectly, you'd be very rich. Nobody knows.
Are there different levels of bias in each of the areas, like newspapers, magazines, TV, radio? Do you find that there are different levels of bias and they sway one way compared to another way?
You mean bias in terms of...
In terms of they might choose one side or they might choose another side and maybe ignore one side?
Yeah, look, that happens, but it varies between newspapers. It's not the genre, it's the newspaper. I mean, The Age, for example, is a small L liberal left-wing newspaper. The Herald Sun's a more conservative one. ABC 7:30 Report is a more left-wing presentation than, say, 7pm Project or Today Tonight even, or the Sunday programs. I don't think that any particular style of media has a bias. They serve their audiences in different ways, and any broadsheet, quality broadsheet, is always going to be a bit sort of liberal, small L liberal. Have
you ever had to sort of change your opinion to suit where you're working?
Oh no, I wouldn't do that.
No?
I've had to change my opinion when I've been wrong, and that's a different matter, and somebody's convinced me I'm wrong, but I would never... And I've taken stands in various places which have been unpopular. When I was editor of the Herald, we ran a traditionally conservative newspaper. We ran an editorial advocating a vote for Bob Hawke, and there was outrage. Ever since I've been on radio, and I feel very strongly about it, I've campaigned against capital punishment, and most of my audience disagrees with it. But they will tolerate it because they say, okay, well, he's got a strongly held view. But you can't. It's not good if they disagree with you all the time. Occasionally it can happen, and that's all right.
In your opinion, what is the most newsworthy topic in society at the moment?
Oh dear, cost of living. People being able to make ends meet, to survive, to pay the bills. This is why they're so frightened of a carbon tax. It could put up bills. People. And we're in a very good state in this country, but I've got no doubt people are concerned that there's the aspiration to buy a house or to buy a better car or to have lots of kids and go to private schools. All those things. I think aspirational living is a big issue, and I think people's struggle to make ends meet.
Neil Mitchell, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and I hope you're at the top of your game for a lot longer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I hope so. Well, I hope I'm around a lot longer and I'm at the top of the game. No, it was good fun. Thanks for that.